I'm Chantel, and it's so nice to meet you guys. Welcome to the second session of the Speak Up Junior Series 2020. So, in this second session, I will be teaching you guys how to build your plot as well as how to build your climax. And before that, let me introduce these two elements, building your plot as well as your climax. These two elements are very essential because they involve the essence of your story. It is what helps to engage your audience to gain their attention as you storytell. And so I shall divide this video into two parts. The first half, I will explain how to build your plot, which involves two things, your introduction as well as a conflict. And the second half, I'll teach you guys how to create your climax. Alright, so let me begin with building your plot. Building your plot is the base of any story. Without a plot, there cannot be any story. You might have an interesting set of characters, or perhaps you have a really good message contained in your story, or you might even have just creative ideas in general, or maybe all three. But if you do not have a plot, the story cannot exist. So I will ensure that you will know how to build a plot as well as a good one. So if you guys will lend me your ears, we can begin. Building your plot involves the intro as well as the conflict, and this will lead to your climax. Alright, so if that's clear, we start with introduction. Alright, introduction is just the starting point of your story. So an introduction is important because any car starts, or any race car starts at the starting line, right? So likewise, any story needs an introduction. A story cannot appear out of nowhere. It needs an origin. And in stories, the introduction is usually the background story of the character, that character's history, you could say. So I will use a few examples. I hope you guys are familiar with it. In the movie Frozen, we know how Elsa has ice powers, right? And unfortunately, when she was young, she accidentally injured her sister Anna with her ice powers. So from that accident, her parents thought it'd be best if she was isolated, if she wore gloves and she lived at a separate wing of the castle. So you can see how this emotional trauma from when she was a little girl has shaped her personality. She grew up to be cold and distant from her sister Anna. So it's important for us to create a background story to our character so that we can understand their personality, and we can also understand why our character makes certain decisions throughout the story. Another example could also be from the movie Maleficent, where Maleficent cursed Sleeping Beauty during her christening. So her parents thought it'd be safer for her to live in the woods. And in the woods, she was surrounded by lots of woodland creatures, by nature, and she grew up being very appreciative of nature. So again, that is a background story which shaped Sleeping Beauty's character, her love for nature. And alright, so that is your introduction for your story. Now we can progress to the second phase of building your plot, which is conflict. Alright, what is conflict? Simply, conflict is just a serious disagreement or an argument which creates drama. It makes your story dramatic. So, a good example, or beforehand, let me introduce 4 types of conflict. The first is called inner conflict. The second is conflict with nature. The third is conflict with society. And finally, there's conflict with fate. Alright. The first is inner conflict, which is just fighting within yourself. It is internal, which means that the character is in conflict with his thoughts or dreams. A good example would be in the movie Tangled, where Rapunzel was in conflict with her own dreams. She wasn't sure if she should follow her dreams and see the outside world, or if she should listen to her mother and just remain in a tower. So that is inner conflict. A second type of conflict is with nature. It involves unavoidable circumstances, which is beyond the control of the character. For example, in The Wizard of Oz, Dorothy's house was sucked in by a tornado and she was transported to the land of Oz. So you can see how the tornado is a natural phenomenon. It is part of nature, and she can't control the tornado, she can't stop it. And that is the conflict between Dorothy and that tornado, which is nature. And the third type is conflict with society. It is where the main character does not fit in with society. For example, in the movie Beauty and the Beast, Belle is shown to be a bookworm. And because of that, the villagers think that she's weird because they don't like reading books. You can see how the creators or the script writers of Beauty and the Beast, they ensured that there was a unique trait, something that set Belle aside from the other villagers, which is her love of books. That is the background story which I mentioned in introduction. It's important because when you have a good background story, it becomes easier to develop your conflict. Just like in Beauty and the Beast, because the creators gave her that unique trait of her love of books, she was in conflict society. They isolated her or did not like her because they found it weird that she loved books. They couldn't understand her love for books. So yes, having a good background story makes it easier for you to develop your conflict later on. And finally, the fourth type of conflict is conflict with fate. This sort of conflict is where the character tries to stop fate, to control his or her fate. For example, in the movie Brave, Merida went to great lengths to prevent her fate of having to marry a man. So yeah, that's the fourth type. You can choose any of the four conflicts I mentioned, but choose one wisely because it will determine your climax as well. Which brings me to the second half of the video, which is building your climax. Alright, firstly, what is climax? It is, conflict at its worst. It is the most dramatic part of your story. It is when there is a lot of action, a lot of drama and movement, and it usually happens around the end of your third act. So perhaps in between your story, or a little bit more than in between. And for example, it's in the movie How to Train Your Dragon, Hiccup and Toothless had to face the Alpha Dragon. That would be the climax of the story. But of course, different movies have different sorts of climaxes. For example, when it comes to hero movies, it might be the scene where the hero is almost defeated by the villain, where it seems like all hope is gone and the hero is going to be defeated by the villain. Like in Wonder Woman, that scene where Diana, Wonder Woman, and Ares, the War of God, they were fighting each other. And Ares was trying to convince Wonder Woman that humanity was not worth saving. And she began to listen to him. She was growing weaker, she was slowly being defeated. But at the very last second, she remembered her boyfriend and she realized that humans are worth saving. So she turned around and she said, no, there's so much more. And she defeated Ares. So that very moment is the climax. It's the part of the story which involves so much suspense. It keeps the audience at the edge of their seats. So that is climax. Or for example, in detective movies, it is the scene where the detective explains who the murderer is or explains the murder. Again, it's the scene where we are left on the edge of our seats. That is climax. So in short, climax involves having to figure out the value of your story, as well as tapping into that value, as well as its opposites, and then putting it as part of your conflict. Yes, it is where the core value of the story is put to the final test. So that's all basically. That's what you need to form a good story, but allow me to then conclude. Alright, so we know how you need to build your plot, which involves two things: your introduction as well as your conflict. Introduction involves the background story of your character so that that person's decisions, personalities is better understood. And after you have created a good introduction comes the conflict. The conflict can be any four of the types which I mentioned, though it does have to fit with your message as well as the theme of your story. And finally, after you have developed the conflict, comes the climax. This is where we create a scene so that we can invoke value into the conflict. And there you have it. That is a good plot as well as your climax. That's all for the second session. Thank you for listening.